Hello and welcome to the Championship Talk podcast. I'm your host Paul O'Toole, and not joined with me this week is my co-host Thomas Falco. He's going to be spending a couple of weeks away from podcasting. Into the news, I think the first place to start is Alex Neil has been sacked as Preston North End manager. He'd been in charge of Preston since July 2017 after replacing Simon Grayson, who left for Sunderland. That didn't turn out well for Simon Grayson. For those of you that watched the Sunderland Till I Die documentary, that he joined in that documentary. Check that out. That's an amazing documentary. In a club statement, Preston said they want to send their thanks to Alex Neil for all of his hard work. However, one win in 9 games isn't particularly great form. Alex Neil, when Preston lost to Luton, basically said the basics at the moment we're finding difficult to do, and that makes it really difficult. People talk about knowing your best team, but if I'm honest, I haven't got a Scooby-Doo what that is at the moment. Your best team generally is reliable, and you're getting the best out of it week in, week out. At the moment, we're nowhere near that. Quite damning comments about his team, so interesting. In a club statement, Alex Neil is assistant manager who's been with him at Hamilton and Norwich. Frankie McAvoy, is going to take over to the end of the season. Preston are 9 points off the relegation zone, so you'd think that's probably going to be a big enough margin unless Rotherham can do something amazing. And obviously, Preston will be looking at managerial options planning for next season. I think those comments come very, very... You're not going to get any motivation out of your players if you say that they're not doing the basics right. So very interesting. But another club that's now looking for a new manager. We've had a number of managerial departures over the last couple of weeks, months. Interesting, but obviously Preston. Generally, myself and Thomas, we're really good fans of Preston. We think they play a really good, honest brand of football. This year hasn't been their best year. It'd be interesting to see who they go with next. I think by taking Frankie McAvoy, giving him to the end of the season, I think that's a good play. Clearly they didn't have someone lined up, so don't rush into a decision and then look at what's happening in the summer. I think that really is a really good way to do it. Obviously 9 points off the relegation zone, you would think that's going to be too big a gap and they're not going to get drawn into that relegation battle, so it could be interesting. The next thing I'm going to talk about, and it would be interesting to get Thomas's take on this, Angus MacDonald's transfer from Barnsley to Hull. And this is not a recent transfer, otherwise Thomas would have told you about it. It happened in January 2018. Now, the reason we're talking about this transfer is Barnsley have been ordered to pay Hull £1 million for not disclosing all of Angus MacDonald's medical information. So, this is how it plays out. The case ended in a tribunal after Hull refused to pay the remaining £200,000 instalment of the £600,000 fee they agreed with Barnsley for MacDonald on the day before the transfer window closed in 2018, January 2018. The arbitration ruled that had Hull been supplied with all relevant medical information, they wouldn't have made the transfer. This is kind of unique. We haven't seen too many instances of this. Angus MacDonald is actually playing for Rotherham right now. He made 21 appearances for Hull, but joined Rotherham last August and has played 29 times for Rotherham this season. The panel had no hesitation in concluding Hull would not have completed the transfer had they had full disclosure of MacDonald's medical history and ruled that Barnsley's breach had caused the Tigers substantial losses. Interesting to see that the compensation fee is more than the actual transfer fee. I think that's interesting to look at, and I think obviously taking into account potential relegation, I think would have been that. Obviously, assuming until the details come out. I think this poses a question around, obviously footballers' medical data is private and confidential until you're getting into a situation where it's relevant to the job they're being paid to do and the effect it has on the club that they work for. Obviously, in this situation, I think it's important to say that there's no indication that Barnsley were dishonest. It's just it looks like that the relevant information wasn't passed on. Barnsley told Sheffield Radio they consider the case closed and individuals associated with the matter are no longer employed with Barnsley FC. So clearly they've drawn a line under this as well. They're not going to be appealing. The panel found there was no dishonesty on Barnsley's part. It just looks like it was an unfortunate series of events that has cost £1 million, which is, I think, very interesting when you think of players and the world of footballers being used as commodities. It's almost like buying a car and not knowing the service history of the car. It brings into light, and it kind of shows that clubs see these football players as assets. And I think we remember that looking at the medical history as being important to a financial sum of money, which I think is interesting. I think it kind of, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that clubs invest huge sums of money on players, obtaining player services for 2, 3, 4 years, and this kind of arbitration or ruling is interesting to look at. Next thing we're going to talk about, or next thing I'm going to not talk about, is me ranting. Neil Warnock has been charged with improper conduct. He kind of admitted in the interview he thought this was coming. Middlesbrough boss Neil Warnock has been charged with improper conduct by the Football Association following comments made by referee about the referee after the defeat to Swansea City. The 92-year-old was angered by calls made by Gavin Ward, including a 97th minute penalty. I think when me and Thomas were looking at this game, I think I pointed out the comments, and if you haven't seen it, there's a great clip on YouTube where you can see Neil Warnock's comments and how angry he was. And midway through the interview, he almost realises what he's saying is going to get him into trouble, and that spurs him on. He seems to really get into it, and so some of the comments, I'm just going to read some of the comments because at the time I couldn't remember them all, but it was really, really funny. He told reporters following the game on the 6th of March, "I'm sure I'll get an apology now from the Director of Referees, Alan Wiley. I've had 3 of them in the last 6 weeks. I've had that many apologies, I don't know what to do with them." He, talking about Gavin Ward, the referee, thought it was a free kick to them, so disallowed a goal. He hadn't seen Balassi win the ball. It's either a penalty or a goal. He's blown the whistle before the shot was happening, but it didn't. No one stopped. It happened as the free kick, as it was happening. I'm a little bit bewildered about the penalty. He pointed for a corner kick. He assures me that when he thought about it, he thought George Saville didn't get the ball and he thought it was a penalty. I asked, "Why did you point to the corner? Were you guessing?" That's what he said. So Neil Warnock's been in trouble for those comments. He actually goes on to make other comments as well, which I thought was interesting. Something about wanting to get in the headlines, and it just shows the passion of Neil Warnock. And I'd much rather have a manager like that wants to win games or managing my football club. I mean, if you're a Middlesbrough fan, you want Neil Warnock managing your football club. It's just great to see a manager with that much passion rather than coming off the field and going, "Yeah, my players don't get the basics right. We lost because of this, that and the other." Actually, Neil Warnock's, he feels aggrieved and it angers him to the point of frustration and outbursts. I think that's amazing. The next thing I want to talk about, and it doesn't directly link to the EFL, though it would have a massive knock-on effect. Okay, so the Premier League clubs are expected to discuss the impact of shirt sponsorship of gambling firms at a shareholder meeting on Thursday. Last year, the House of Lords Committee recommended that gambling operators should no longer be allowed to advertise on the shirts of sports teams or any other part of the kit from 2023. Bear in mind that was only a recommendation. That wasn't a you have to do this. The government launched a wide-ranging review in gambling laws late last year, and calls for evidence ended on the 31st of March. Clubs are due to receive an update on the findings of Spurs shirt sponsorship and the effect it could have on gambling addiction. A spokesman for the Department of Digital Culture and Media: "We are currently undertaking a comprehensive review of gambling laws to make sure they are fit for the digital age and call for public evidence for open contributions. We're determined to tackle the problem of gambling in all forms and work to build on our strong track record of introducing measures to protect those at risk." So there's no firm decisions been made to remove the Spurs shirt sponsorship. Obviously, the Premier League are less reliant on gambling firms as the EFL. And this is where the knock-on effect happens. EFL chair Rick Perry has warned of a catastrophic impact to finances if gambling sponsorship was removed immediately. Rick Parry told MPs that it would be potentially catastrophic if it came in overnight and would create major difficulties. Phased in over time, frankly, clubs would need to find a new way to adapt. If any changes were to come in quicker, it would cause major problems. He reiterated that gambling sponsorship is a significant source of income worth at least £40 million to EFL clubs. Which is, when you consider that we've talked about the TV rights revenue and the Championship clubs get between 5 million and 8 million a year in TV revenue. If you then look at gambling as a source of that income, that's probably the next biggest income. Some clubs will have bigger gate receipts. So some clubs with larger stadiums that are filled more often than not will earn more money from match day revenue. Not all clubs will. And obviously, this would be he's right. If suddenly next season it's no gambling on any shirts, if you look at your club's shirt, chances are at some point in the last 5 or 6 years there's been a gambling logo on there at some point. Obviously, we've just had the controversy around Football Index and the two clubs, Nottingham Forest and QPR, that have had, obviously they've taken the logo off the front of the shirts because that company's gone into administration. This provides an interesting talking point, and one that we will park to get Thomas's views, because obviously Thomas has worked in the gambling industry before. He's seen the effects of compulsive gambling, and he's seen the kind of the support that's out there, or lack of, for people that do have problems with gambling. Personally, myself, gambling is a way of enhancing watching a sport. I don't necessarily see it as harmful if you are looking at it to supplement enjoyment, pleasure of a football game, a horse race, etc. It becomes a problem when it becomes the reason that you're watching that. So if you're watching it to gamble as opposed to gambling to enhance your enjoyment, there's different effects there. And I think that, go back a couple of years, there was adverts just before games started, at half time, just after games started. If it's on the shirts, it goes around the billboards. I can see how someone who's probably, someone who's tackling demons of compulsive gambling, I can see how that you wouldn't necessarily be able to watch a football game without thinking about betting. So I do think that they're right to look at the measures taken. Shirt sponsorship, I probably wouldn't say is their biggest hurdle to tackle. I would say adverts before, during and after games, and there obviously has been measures taken to limit when gambling can be advertised. I think that audio and that visual, get a free bet, bet now, that type of almost encouragement is worse than shirt sponsorship. I don't necessarily think shirt sponsorship of any kind is bad. Obviously, we've had in the past football club sponsors by alcohol companies. So, I mean, Liverpool, go back in the early 90s, sponsored by Carlsberg. I know Tottenham, I'm going back to show you how old I am. Tottenham were sponsored by Holston Pills. Loads of other situations where football clubs were sponsored by alcohol companies. And obviously that's potentially, it could follow the same path if someone had the same demons. So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. Obviously, they're just recommendations, so they're not saying, right, okay, you've got to remove it right now. But it would leave a hole in finances of EFL clubs because, it is a big market and it's obviously something that EFL clubs, it's a source of revenue that EFL clubs rely on, as do the Premier League. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of those recommendations and whether any laws come out of that, or whether the Premier League takes a voluntary step towards removing gambling sponsorship. Most clubs, all clubs, probably have got a betting partner that they promote, whether in their matchday programs or etc. And something like that could continue. So, thank you all for watching. As always, leave us a thumbs up if you like the show. Hit a comment down below if you think of anything I've missed. For the time being, I will just put Thomas's face next to me for some moral support. Doesn't hurt. And he will be back in a couple of weeks' time, no doubt. Probably challenging a lot of the views, but for the time being, I will just enjoy the fact that I get to talk without being interrupted. As always, if you want to check out the main podcast where I'm going to be going through every game and previewing the games that are coming up, head over to any type of podcast subscription service. We're on them all. If you're interested and you like that podcast, leave us a review of any kind. That just helps other people see the show. Okay, thank you all for listening, and I shall speak to you all after Easter. Goodbye.